I think a lot of growth comes from your peer group. And I think a lot of times we focus on like, I want to be connected to the people that are further along the path than you. When the reality is like the people that you're kind of coming up with will be the source of a lot of your forward progress. And I think that people don't spend enough time developing relationships laterally.
Today, I am speaking with someone I really admire, as do a lot of us who witnessed the DSLR revolution and saw him as one of the pioneers of the Vimeo generation, the one and only Ryan Booth. Ryan is a director of commercials, music videos, live performances, documentaries, and is currently working on his first feature film. In this conversation, Ryan and I chat about the evolution of his career, how he began honing in his voice as an artist, the psychological hurdles he overcame going from cinematographer to director, his approach to continuous growth, and much more. Ryan presents a ton of wisdom wrapped inside of humility and vulnerability and shares a lot of valuable insight. I believe you'll be inspired by Ryan's approach to his craft in pursuit of your own creative potential. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Ryan Booth. You're a storyteller. What does the hero of your story want?
What does hero of my story want?
Yeah.
Oh, God. I think the hero of my story wants to be as kind of honest and truthful as possible in the things that I make. So I want to get better at communicating the complexity of being alive. And I want to be a part of creating a handful of artifacts that can outlast my time here. I think that some of the most impactful things that I've experienced over the years have been pieces of art or films or books that when you engage with them, it feels like it's a present tense conversation. And then you find out it's hundreds of years old. And so for me, it's trying to get better at acquire the skills necessary to create a piece of work that can serve as that for somebody many years from now.
Yeah, I like that you said, use the word artifacts and not just said films. Does that come from your background in like multiple things?
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, like, you know, I started in audio. And so the first kind of projects I was involved with making were records. And so I learned kind of project-based creation by working recording studios. And that word artifacts, that's a recording studio term. Like all the musicians that I worked with, they talked about it because there's the performance and then there's the artifact of the performance. And I think that, yeah, I've always been interested in creating things. And it took me a while to get to the film part of that. So it's not the only thing that I think about creating for sure. Yeah.
And you went to school for history and for English.
Yes.
How does that kind of, all of those different things play into your work now?
I mean, I think for me, like the kind of smart ass answer that one of my history teachers used to use, because he was like, when you tell people that you're a history major, they're going to be like, oh, so you want to be a teacher. And he was like, you say back to them, history teaches you how to find the through line in a story with incomplete information. So what job can you do in which you're making sense of an incomplete data set and presenting a narrative out of that? He's like, just about any job. So tell him to shut up, which is funny. But I think for me, like, English is about communicating and it's about learning how to kind of think publicly, basically. Reading something and then writing about it. I mean, like I spend the majority of my time doing those things, which is researching and then writing, is the vast majority of how I spend my time.
Unintentional at the time.
No, I wouldn't have known, but I think that yeah, what I did in college actually has served me very well as I've kind of moved into the filmmaking space, for sure.
Which most people don't get to do that.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
That's a privilege.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Definitely.
So you grew up in a completely different part of the world than I did.
Yeah.
How did that influence your worldview, the way that you think, the way that you see the world?
I mean, I'm from Texas, and I definitely feel like, especially as I get older and don't live in Texas anymore, I think because I'm not kind of swimming in that pond anymore, I feel like I've been able to, the last few years, like really start to identify how that place and the people that I grew up with has influenced me about how I see the world, things I'm interested in. And so, yeah, I mean, I think Texas is a very unusual and interesting place full of people. If you look back at the history, like people that moved to Texas were pretty adventurous, to say it would be the kind way to say it. Batshit crazy is the the other way to say definition. It. Because like that was the kind of edge of the country at the time, and there was an enormous amount of conflict, and so the people who moved to that place were like incredibly kind of. I mean, there's a reason why there's so many kind of like cowboy stories, because it's very like, it was the tip of the spear of like a particular kind of point in our history, and that has trickled down to the people who've stayed there. And so I think for me, it's made me very interested in kind of investigating place and how that like influences story and influences the people that are from there. So. Yeah, I mean, I think it's half the books on my shelf up there about kind of the development of Texas in the 1800s, because I do think it feels like a metaphor for a lot of what's happening in the world today, for sure.
How do you see that? Because I noticed a couple of your books. The ones that caught my eye were some on like immigration and things like that relate to kind of my story. But how do you see all of that kind of expanding into the way that the world is right now?
I mean, this will get pretty political pretty quickly. But no, I mean, I think like, look, country borders are made up. And like, as they say, like history is the story that like, what's the phrase? History is written by the winners, basically. And so I think that a lot of the kind of mythology of Texas, which is what I grew up learning about, covered up a lot of incredible and terrifying, like, death and destruction, basically. The kind of Tejano people, the Native American tribes that populated that area, and basically the kind of European settlers all kind of collapsed and kind of ended up it being this kind of like center of conflict, and a lot of really terrible things happened. And I think that for me, from a storytelling standpoint, I think realizing that history is very messy and there is not kind of a clean this happened and this happened, these people did this and whatever. There's this kind of like very uncomfortable reality of our past and what it means to like reckon with your own kind of ancestry and history and what that means for the future. And I think that because of the intersection of all of those things, Texas in particular has been very kind of instrumental to me in thinking about kind of, broader kind of arc of history. The border is obviously like a current kind of flashpoint of kind of are you on my team or not, in terms of kind of political discussion. And I think that like that, how I grew up, I've just realized that so much of how I grew up, the story I was told growing up is not really what actually happened. And so reconciling those two things, I think, has been a big part of me developing as a storyteller.
Yeah. Because you only got when
I got
we
the
were going
whitewash
out.
version of the story. Is this? I mean,
Yeah,
like
that's the short of it.
Is the short of it,
Right.
and like understanding the kind of complexity and the nuance and the kind of the people that were involved and are still involved in kind of the development of that particular part of the country, I think has been very inspiring to me and eye-opening to me.
To find the more of the truth, kind of uncover, like, okay, this actually happened that nobody told me about when I was. Yeah, I wonder how much that, because obviously we could go and say, well, now we get to find out more because everything's posted immediately online, but now we deal with the other side of it, which is manipulation and what is true or not, or and how does that impact the way that stories are told when before we didn't know what was true because we were just not being told. Now we don't know what is true because could be fabricated.
Yeah.
So in a sense, it's like the same problem.
Yeah. Well, and taking into account like who's telling the story,
right.
And I don't know if that's something that we fully, I mean, it's something we're grappling with in real time for sure.
It's so interesting to see like how the technology now is playing a part in that, you know. But it's unfortunate in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So I found something really fun about you that I had not realized.
Yeah.
You auditioned for Friday Night Lights.
I did.
Not just got the part.
I absolutely did. Yes, I did.
Can you and then you turned it down and kind of went a different path. So can you tell that story? And then, like what would your life? What do you think your life would look like?
Well,
today?
when I was finishing school, I came back to Texas for. I was in Texas and was like, all right, I came home and was like, I either want to, because in college I did theater and then I was playing music and I was like, I want to do something creative. I'm not sure what. And I had been taking some acting classes and my acting teacher is the one who said, hey, they're auditioning for Friday Night Lights. You should go out for a part. And I was like, all right, if I audition and I get the part, I'm going to move to LA with a buddy and we're going to like go do the film thing. And then if I don't, I had met this guy who ran a studio in Nashville and he was like, offered me an internship to come out and work in his studio. I was like, all right. It all kind of came down to like a couple of week period of time. And I was like, if I get the part, I'm going to LA. If I don't get the part, I'm going to Nashville and I'm going to go do music. And so I auditioned, and this is not for a huge role. This is like a few lines, a couple of times I would be in the piece, whatever. But, and I never heard back from them. And I was like, all right, fine. The time came. The guy that I worked for was like, I start a record on Tuesday. I need you out here. It's like, okay, great. So I drive out to Nashville on that Monday, let's say. And I get there. I walk into the studio for my first day in the studio, and I get a phone call from the casting director. And she's like, I'm so sorry. Like the scenes that you're in, they got pushed by, a couple of weeks. Just want to let you know, like we loved your audition. We'd love to offer you the part. Can you be in the Astrodome, like basically that night or whatever? And I was like, couldn't buy a plane ticket, was in the studio already. It literally, if I turned around and started driving, I wouldn't make it in time. And so I had to say, thanks so much, but I can't do it. I got cast in Friday Night Lights, but I had to turn it down because I was in a recording studio in Nashville. So I do joke around that it feels like I just took a 7-year detour and then worked my way back into film and TV eventually. Yeah.
How old are you at that time?
21, 22.
So you had no idea.
No.
What you wanted to do?
No, none at all. Yeah.
Nothing. Yeah, I have some friends who are around that age, and you forget sometimes how much pressure you feel at that age to kind of know what you're supposed to do,
for sure.
Kind of like what. But it's sometimes just like just try whatever. Like you'll find it by a 7-year detour, or maybe not that long, because we're impatient people. But it's fun to think like what would have happened if I had gone down that route.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it would be interesting to see what would have happened if I had just like gone to LA right away, But I think, the music, spending time in music, I feel like in retrospect, taught me a lot about how to kind of work with talent, and I learned a ton, and I learned a ton of stuff kind of in those early years that like I think you'd learn no matter what you were working on. Like,
right.
You know, it was mostly transferable skills. So I feel like the real consequence is that I'm about 5 or 6 years older than my peer group. Like, because I was in music for 5 or 6 years.
Right.
I joke around a lot that I paid my dues in the wrong industry. But because I never got to have an enormous amount of fun. I was doing grunt work in the studios. But I'm about 5 years older than my peer group because I was, because of that detour.
Yeah.
But other than that, like, it feels all like it was mostly transferable skills.
And is that why you are so drawn to music work now?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was always like really drawn to, I've always kind of been incredibly interested in music.
And you said you play?
I play, yeah. I mean, I was in a band for half a second in Nashville and we were horrible. We were so
What do you
bad.
play?
I made a record and the whole thing. I play guitar, play drums well enough. But yeah, I play guitar mostly.
If you play anything not a perfect level in Nashville, you're always going to be like way terrible.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, like
you walk down downtown and every band is, it's a session musician.
Say the one thing I'm very good at rhythm guitar, and many of the records that so a lot of times what happens in recording studios, the bands come in and they get it in their head. They want to play on their records, of course. But like playing in a studio environment versus playing live, very different. And the number of times that a band would play and then they would leave, and then session musicians would come in after the fact, or myself, I'm secretly on many records that I worked on back in the day of just like, dude, they're not in time. It's not in time. And I would just sit down and like chunk out like a rhythm part, and they'd never know. So I was pretty good at rhythm guitar. I was good enough to be on some like records you'd know that I can't tell you because the bands would get mad. But
that's incredible.
I'm on a few records
that's
secretly.
Awesome. Yeah. I always think of
Kings of Leon.
Oh wow, those are some good guitar parts.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Now I want you to play, and I want to hear you play, because I also play guitar, not at Nashville level, but it's also fun. And I always think of I was talking to a friend recently, and we were talking about music and film, and the idea of, when you get like session musicians who are really good, and like the Nashville way of doing things is like you book them for half a morning to knock out an entire album because they just go, and you would never know, they're so good. But the idea of like coming in a room with the agenda of just like playing and jamming and see if something happens, I feel like that sometimes is not afforded as much in film because we go in with the objective of like, we have to finish this, whatever this product is. Yeah. But I always wonder, like, what would the version of film of like jamming, a band jamming and seeing what happens look like? Yeah. Where you're just playing.
For sure. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I definitely feel like it's so expensive to shoot. By the time you get to the shooting part, you're spending the majority of the money on shoot days because it takes so many people to kind of make it happen, that I feel like, the kind of like experimental version or the kind of jam band version of filmmaking, I don't know. It's got to be really small, I guess. I know some directors work that way, like on their films, but I definitely think you have to be okay with the fact that you're gonna get a lot of shit that doesn't work, which is fine. Yeah,
and just try something and be okay with it not working out.
Yeah.
Another thing that I read that I liked, and I wanted to kind of bring that up, was this quote: "How do you make a thing that feels like you made it, even if your name is not attached to it?" So can you just tell me like where that comes from? And how has that impacted you when you first heard that? And now?
So I did a between music and film, I kind of was doing photography mostly as a hobby, but I wasn't, I think partially because of my history background and being interested in kind of the world at large and current events, I thought I might want to do photojournalism for half a second. And I applied to and got into this workshop with a bunch of conflict photographers and went to Cambodia and did this like 2-week thing where we developed a photo essay kind of under the mentorship of a conflict photographer. And he was the one who, after a couple of weeks, and this was, they would print out the photos at the end of each day of working, and then you would kind of, because he was helping you do layouts. And so at one point he spread out my photos in the mix of all the other students' photos, like on this big table. And he was like, your entire goal in your career is that if like all your stuff was in this big pile, that I would be able to, or someone would be able to kind of go, that one's Ryan, that one's Ryan, that one's Ryan. That having a sense of authorship to the things that you make, that people will, that they can pick it out even if they don't know specifically that you made it. And I feel like that I obviously don't do photography professionally, but that has always really stuck with me. I love it when I'll make a commercial and like, I'll get a text message from somebody be like, did you work on this? And I'll be like, yes, I did. That always is like a marker of success for a project for me, is that if people feel like I made it, even if they don't know that I did. So yeah. And too, I mean, I feel like that was a big, because I started as a DP and then moved into directing, and like, especially in film, one of my big fears moving from DPing to directing was like, am I just further away from the actual source of creation, which is the camera? Right. And how am I going to have a sense of authorship over the things that I'm making if I'm getting further and further away from the camera? And so that kind of, that phrase that Gary told me back in the day, has continued to like stay in my mind, which is, keeping that front of mind.
What, I guess what, if you had to pick out the ingredients to create that, what would you say those are?
I don't think that's something that you get to define. Yeah. I feel like that's somebody.
Because I'm as you were talking, I'm like, what? I feel like I can pick out your work, like I think you've accomplished that, and I'm sure you probably would be like, well, I'm still working on it quite a bit, but.
No, but I mean, I know what you're saying. I mean, like, I think it's confidence plus experience, like literal time of like making consistent choices, like, and like, I think it's like, I'll say some sports metaphors from time to time, which is hilarious because I'm not a sports guy, but it's like shooting a bank shot, right? It's like
I don't know what that means.
Basketball. All right. Don't aim for the basket, aim for the backboard.
There we go.
So got it. So I feel like it's a little bit like shooting a bank shot, which is like if you're kind of consistent in your choices and the things that you're most interested in, and an accumulation over time, like by being kind of very like precise and confident in going like, I like this, I'm going to shoot that, that over time, like you'll see the thread will be obvious kind of to other people first usually, and then to yourself if you're lucky.
Thing that Rick Rubin talks about of just like, you just got to be confident in what you like.
I mean, that's like the whole kind of how to find your voice thing is something people talk a lot about. And I think that's all it is like confidence in what you like. That's it. That's it.
Yeah. And I liked the thing he said. I can't remember if it was a book or an interview, but basically he said something along the lines of, it's like when you go to a restaurant and we both order the same thing, I might love it and you might hate it. Doesn't mean you're wrong.
Yeah.
It's just I love it. You hate it. That's fine. And he's like, but you have the confidence to go, no, I actually do love it. Or not go, I guess I kind of hate it too, which is, I guess, when you don't have that confidence in your own choices, then you start rethinking, or you start going double, like, well, I guess maybe I do hate it a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's also, I guess it's like part of it. It's probably just like your taste, your skills, but then part of it is just, developing that confidence
For sure.
in your choices. And so how have you done any intentional work to develop that confidence?
I mean, for sure. I feel like every project I work on is, if it's not explicit beforehand, it's definitely kind of part of the, like, once the dust settles on a project, I definitely sit down and, like, for instance, every commercial I do, after it's done, I'll pull up the original treatment with the final commercial and watch them and go, like, all right, now as I reread the treatment, like, does it feel like I managed to get this idea through the gauntlet? Does it still feel, even if it's different, does it feel like that original document? And if it doesn't, then I've got some things to work on, And so I had an early mentor say, like, every time you do a project, take one thing that went well and one thing that you want to work on and get rid of the rest. It's too much to, like, make any one job, like, have to carry that much water. Just take one thing that was good and one thing that you want to do better, and, like, take that to the next one. And so I feel like for me, I'm not a systematic person by any means. I'm not, like, running analysis on everything. It's a gut feeling, but I think for me, I do try and do that is like, use those two things from the last handful of projects, and then go into another project going, like, this is what I want to work on performance. I want to work on my shot selection. I want to work on, wardrobe on this. I don't want to let this go. I want to, like, focus my attention on these things and, like, very specifically kind of continue to work out specific muscles as you are trying to get stronger at storytelling.
Because when you're growing as an artist, but then also when you start working with more and more people and people on top who make decisions, I feel like that's something that takes a lot of work to get to the point where you go,
God,
no,
this
is my choice, you know, and not let the other decisions or the other people influence your choices.
For sure.
Because, like compromising your vision.
Yes. For sure.
I think that's...
Well, and then I think understanding when a compromise is a compromise and when you're compromising your vision, right? Like, those are two different things.
Yeah.
Because just the nature of, like, if you want to do something in which no one can touch it at all, like be a painter, or like work in a medium in which it's your soul, you're the sole person creating from the beginning to the end. We've personally decided to engage in an art form and a kind of process of creating in which to do it at the level that I find most interesting is, like, you have to work with sometimes hundreds of people. And so just by the nature of involving other people, you're introducing compromise into nearly every decision that gets made, because I can't do everything. And therefore you're kind of creating space for people to bring their own kind of input and ideas and approach into the thing that you're wanting to make. And so learning how to compromise, I think, is critical in that sense. But then knowing the difference of when have we tipped past the, like, point in which the overarching vision of what I'm trying to accomplish, like, is now at jeopardy because of these sequence of decisions. And that can be a bit of a nuanced conversation, but that's definitely, like, there's a big difference between compromise and compromising the overall direction.
Yeah. Is it compromising as simple as the way something looks versus a performance? Like, I guess there's elements of both in everything. Everything is a compromise of the compromises.
It is. I mean, I don't know what the best place to, well, okay, I will say one of the things that was most, I think, helpful in retrospect about working in music first is that what I realized early is that Directing performance is largely about creating an environment, and then making decisions within that environment is truly a collaboration with the people you've brought into it. So a huge part of directing a performance, the decisions have been made by the time you get to the actual performance with the musician. Because in what universe would I like walk up to Jack White and be like, hey man, do you think you could sing that a little different? You know?
Yeah.
So it's more about like building the frame and then allowing like the people to do what they do best within the context of what you've made. And so I think that's really like what I think about when I think about compromise. So that, you know, in the same way that I wouldn't walk up to Jack and be like, I need you to sing, you know, you're a little sharp, man. Can you like whatever? I wouldn't do that with an actor either, you know, like, hey, can you say that line just a little different? I think understanding that like, that my role is not to micromanage in that capacity, because I need to create a space for people to do what they do best. And so for me, that's kind of the top line of what I think about when I think about, like, I don't subscribe to auteur theory. I don't think it's true. I think they're just better at hiding their collaborators.
Right.
But they're still building a frame. And like, I don't care if they're like saying, change this RGB value on the color grade. Like that is irrelevant in my opinion. The compromise comes from how you build the frame, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Because thinking of the role of a producer in a studio environment, which is, it's funny that the words are completely different.
It doesn't mean producer doesn't mean producer. Yeah.
But the role of a producer, is not telling people what to play or arranging or anything. It's just creating an environment. If you're dealing with good musicians, where they just, like you said, they feel like they can perform at their best. They're comfortable, they're safe, you know, and then that's when the best ideas come up. You know, it's when they feel that. And I guess, it's the same for a director in that case. Is just creating that environment where people feel like, oh, I can perform, you know, and less about dictating, like you said, do this a little bit differently, do that. But I feel like so often that's what people might think directing is. You know, it's like, say this line differently, or, you know, like how much of that is true versus how much of it is just, you're just setting an environment where people can, you know, they know what they're supposed to do and they just have to go in and do it, versus you going, no, do this differently, do that, you know, tweaking.
There's a Fincher quote that I really like, which is, you don't know what directing is until the sun is setting and you've got 5 shots and you're only going to get 2. Like that's directing. That's decision. It's really decision making under time and money pressure. And so like, you know, theoretically you've made the decisions to put yourself at that place when the sun is setting, and who knows how you got there, but you know you needed to be there, and like the light is right, but you just don't have as much as you needed, and blah, 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 blah. And now you've got to decide. And like, that's a compromise. Like that's definitely a compromise. And it's your job to know the impact of that compromise, and like, what are the 2 shots that you absolutely have to have in this scenario. That's your job as a director, is to know what are those, what do you absolutely need to have to kind of maintain the overarching thing that you're trying to create, and then let the kind of like minutia fall away, you know, or get washed away by time and money, for sure. Yeah.
Because when you say Fincher, my mind immediately goes to the more clinical approach of making things.
For sure.
And I feel like you have a more loose, or a more, you know, what would you say? Would you say you want to react to the moment more?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, and but I think that's like I appreciate, for a long time I felt like I wasn't sure if I could be a director. When I was deep, reverse. When I was DPing, I had a feeling that I wanted to direct. And I felt like maybe I wasn't meant to be a director because I couldn't see the entirety of what we were going to get in advance, like in my head. I couldn't see everything. I was like, I kind of want to just set this up and then like see what happens, you know? Like I love street photography. I love to go out and shoot on the street precisely because I'm reacting to things that are happening. And if I am within the flow of things that are happening, I can definitely find how to get frames and how to build something out of like what otherwise is an uncontrolled environment. And what I've realized is that for me, from a directing standpoint, I do best kind of creating scenarios in which you can kind of let the wind-up toys bounce around in the kind of box that you've built and then photograph it like a documentary. And then you step in and kind of influence things as you go. But it took me a while to realize that that's like a completely valid way of directing. Whereas like I remember I heard an early story of Fincher from Fincher's colorist who said that he would sit next to him with a laser pointer and like hit the screen and be like, I need like literally calling out RGB values of like this red needs to come down, like, you know, the R needs to come down 4 points, you know, or whatever. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't do that. Maybe I'm not a director, you know? But I think that like he's for sure kind of the prototype of a particular kind of directing, but like it's all intuitive and it's all about how you build the box and how you want to work within it. Like that's what I mean by you create the design your own process, and it's all fine. You can do whatever you want. And so I feel like for me, when I kind of found, you know, I've talked about it ad nauseum, but like Chloe Zhao's The Writer, when I saw that movie, I was like, holy shit. Like I can build on top of a real story with real people in real places, but I don't have to let it just happen as a documentary. Like I can, you know, explore the narrative line from just on the other side of doc. And I feel like for me, that was like truly like a monumental moment of realizing that like you can do whatever you want, like do whatever you want, whatever works for you, I think is completely fine. So I think that's something that I kind of have continued to realize. So I'm impressed and amazed by the kind of attention to detail by the kind of, you know, the Finchers and the Nolans and those guys. But for me, like it's very loose and kind of intuitive, like exploration for sure.
How much of that do you think comes from growing in the craft versus getting to know yourself more?
That's a great question. I think it's a little bit of both. I think that those are two sides of the same coin. Like I think the more you grow in your craft, the more you have tools to say what you want to say. And then you realize like, oh shit, like what do I want to say? Which then makes you go like, I need to like work internally about what do I care about? What's my process? Why am I doing this? And then you start to pick up the tools and start making things. And then you like, it's that kind of like cyclical feedback that I think is really important. So it's a little bit of both.
Because you've done some internal work in the last,
for sure,
I don't know how long, but and I was curious as how that has impacted you, how that has made you, like what are some like maybe tangible ways that you feel like, man, I can look back at myself 3 years ago and go, man, I'm so glad that I did this work to grow. And
I think the most important thing, I think, has been a willingness to be embarrassed in public. Because directing, a lot of times, like the scariest moments on set are when it's like, dude, I thought it was going to work, and nothing that we're doing right now is working. And you got a bunch of people looking at you going like, you know, this costs, you know, a pretty sizable amount of money. A 10-minute conversation is like pretty expensive. What do you want to do? Like, what do you want to do?
Right.
And I think that like that feeling at that moment is like, it feels a bit like you're completely like butt naked in front of everybody. And I feel like learning to not run away from that feeling, but embracing like, this is it. This is the job at this particular moment, and learning that doesn't have to force your hand from a decision-making standpoint, but allowing time to slow down and go, all right, this is embarrassing now because like maybe my idea wasn't good enough, or it should have been this, or could have been that, or I didn't listen to whatever, but like here we are, and how are we going to get out of it? So I think problem solving in front of people is quite embarrassing, and being willing to be embarrassed, I think, has been the most important like area of growth for me as a director.
There's the aspect of like public on set, but then it made me think of public, you know, we live our lives in public, you know, as much as we allow with social, but being embarrassed in order to do things, you have to get rid of that, I'm going to put something out that I care about. And maybe that is a little bit more related to passion work than like client work, but I feel like that's a hard thing often for people to go. I mean, and I'm speaking for myself here, because sometimes it's like, man, I don't know if I'm good enough, or if I know enough, or even doing what we're doing right now has been for me like, oh, you know, am I smart enough to have a conversation, or am I eloquent enough? All of those things, and growing enough or building up that confidence to go, at the end of the day, like, maybe I'm not.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. But you've developed that confidence, or that you know, trust in yourself to go, hey, you know, I'm going to put it out. I'm going to do the work and put the work out. Otherwise, it's never going to get anywhere.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, is that something that you've struggled with, just like continue to kind of work through?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I feel like on every job there's that moment, there's like a moment where you're like, wow, this is really embarrassing. And like not shrinking back, knowing when that's coming, and then not shrinking back from it, I think is like a continuous process for sure.
And then thinking too, when we were talking about, you know, that growth that's you've gone through in the last couple of years, you know, been trying to make your feature for a little bit of time. How different do you think the feature would be today versus if you had made it a couple of years ago?
I mean, I think the good thing about this particular story, like if I could have moved on, I had a conversation with a friend who was like, dude, can you just set it down and do something else, you know? And I've tried now several times, and I feel like it just won't go away, this particular story. And so I'm listening to that. And so I'm glad that it hasn't happened yet, because I don't think I could have made the movie before now. I think that I just was in such a different place. I don't think I would have been like able to engage in the way that I wasn't prepared for it. Basically. So the people we have involved now are like some pretty serious people. And I feel like I couldn't have like managed to keep this very kind of precious idea and work it through like these other people, like with these other people's involvement for sure. And not just that, but I feel like you know, every year more of myself goes into the script, and then the people that are coming around it are contributing as well. And so it feels like like every year something will happen. I'll be somewhere with either musicians or out somewhere. Like I had some friends that texted me, they went to a show like a couple months ago. These are professional musician friends of mine. Went to a show, they were at this concert, and essentially one of the scenes that I had written, an interaction between the singer and the audience. It was a pretty hostile crowd to an opening act. And there's this like one scene that's like kind of captures what it feels like to be a guest opener with a crowd that's like, can you just hurry up? And like we didn't pay to see you.
Yeah, we're not here for you.
And my buddy literally filmed this interaction.
Oh, wow.
And texted me, and in the background you can hear his partner was with him, and she is like, oh my God, like she goes, literally, this is the scene from Stages.
Yeah.
And he sent me the video, and it was like almost exactly like how the scene in the film played out. And I think for me, like every year there's that kind of like, there's more and more confirmation that like we've written something that's very truthful, and that it continues to change with time as it's gone on. And so I just am like, I haven't been able to put it down. So
it'll get made when it needs to be made.
Exactly. Yeah.
Switching gears a little bit.
Yes.
I want to talk some about the impact that technology has had on storytelling over the last, maybe call it decade.
Yeah.
Where do you see storytelling going? How do you see all of the different things that have impacted the way that we tell stories and the way that is changing in the world?
I mean, I'm not smart enough to have a great opinion on this. I think what is interesting is it does feel like kind of younger generations are engaging with stories in shorter and shorter formats. I think it feels like people want, especially kind of coming out of the pandemic, they want to experience things together as well. So in addition to kind of like, I mean, my kids, for instance, don't understand the idea that like, you know, a movie theater only plays movies at a certain time. They're like, I don't understand. Yeah. Like I literally don't understand, because their entire life is on demand. And so I think that is going to have a knock-on effect for sure. I think that like people's, like the theatrical format continues to like be both important and less important. You know, I watch as much YouTube as I do like film and television, for sure, traditional film and television. So I don't know. I have no idea, but I do know that like the ways that we're engaging, just if I go off of my own pattern of viewing things, is fractured amongst many different kind of delivery mechanisms at this point. And yet, like, I still think going to the theater is really important. I think, you know, I mean, I know we were talking about the Sphere stuff earlier, like, I am interested in all the different ways that it might continue to evolve. I think it's just really hard to know because the technology continues to change so quickly, and it also, like, film is a weird one because we are making it for ourselves, but like the audience kind of is the other half of the equation, you know, like the equation's not done until an audience engages, and like audiences continue to change how they want to engage. And so I don't know, man. I have no idea. I have no clue, other than like, I think the role of storytelling and art is increasingly, is always and will continue to be incredibly important tool in helping us process, frankly, what the fuck is going on in the world. Because you look at the world around you and go like, what is happening? And I think that, you know, art and literature and stories and all of these things are at the front line of kind of us sitting around going like, this is pretty wild. Like, how did people process this kind of change before? How, like, how are we processing it now? What is a vision for the future? Like, all of these things like get expressed through film. So that's as important as ever, but delivery mechanism, I have no idea.
Yeah. And the role of art is to ask questions. And I'm almost 40, you know, so I'm older than the YouTube generation in a sense. So yeah, I probably am a little bit more attached to the 16:9 theatrical framing of things. But yeah, I wonder how much that canvas that is constantly changing is going to impact just the way that we think about stories, or is story, regardless of, like you said, delivery mechanism, going to continue to ask questions, going to continue to help us process, you know, is that going to change, or is storytelling going to become something that kind of hits a wall in a sense because of, okay, now we're relying on algorithms to even, pick what we watch and all of that. Like that just has changed so much.
It has. Yeah.
And I'm just curious, to just know.
I have no idea. I don't know. I mean, not only do I not know, but I don't know if it matters entirely.
Yeah.
I feel like there is the like kind of Mr. Beast of it all, right? Which is like, let's maximize retention, let's just, I want Velcro on our eyeballs, right? But I think that like, if we're engaging in this from an artistic standpoint, which is, I have questions about how the world works, then the delivery mechanism stuff or how people watch it, whatever, those are all valid questions that smart people need to think about, but I don't necessarily think it's the filmmakers who need to think about that as much. We need to partner with people who are, for sure, and be smart about that. I think we need to be less precious about kind of the things that we, it's like it has to be it has to be seen in this way or it doesn't count, or whatever. But I think that like the power comes from like a filmmaker who has something that's like a burning question that they want to explore. Like, I feel like filmmakers need to be led by that. And then how it gets to people, like, I don't know, somebody will figure it out.
So I guess in a sense, it's a little bit of the art or film versus content.
Yes, correct.
What is content? Is content just trying to provide answers? Is film asking questions?
Yes.
Is that, is it difference? Is it all the same? I think that's
for sure.
Yeah. It's a little bit of that.
For sure.
Because I think our generation has had a hard time, as every generation does, with change, but just adapting to the new way of doing things. Well,
yeah, I mean, look, I think that my kind of, the people I look up to, like career-wise, and like, the people who are, 10 years older than me or whatever, the world they came up in the careers they have don't really exist in the same way anymore. Yeah. So we're kind of in this weird bubble where like a lot of it's kind of getting made up as we're going. In our age group, for sure, like the people that are 10 years behind us, like, look at us the same way. Like, what are you guys doing? You know what I mean?
We're not the cool kids anymore.
Well, not the cool kids, but like I mean, for lack of a better word, the Vimeo moment is over. Right. Yeah. Like that's not how it works anymore. And that's not a negative thing. That's just like the world has moved on. And I think that like that is kind of the challenge of kind of change is like you don't have a new model to reference, and so it's scary because you're kind of making it up as you go along, and like it's easy to kind of go like, am I like, is this right? Is this worth pursuing? Like, I don't know,
It's kind of like the thing that people say about AI. It's like, hey, AI is not going to take your job. It's going to be someone who adapts to using AI that's going to come for your job. Yeah. It's just like learning how to adapt while staying true to yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Sounds easy. Easy enough.
Easy enough.
Easy enough to do it. So you're a dad, but you're also in a industry that requires you to travel at the sound of the phone. Someone calls and you're like, all right, I'm out. What have you learned through being a dad, and how are you working through that sort of way of living, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, I think the truth is going back to that I paid my dues in the wrong industry question. My partner was pregnant with my oldest when I started filmmaking. So I've never not been a dad while being a filmmaker. And so that kind of like 5 or 6 years when I was working in audio was my kind of like I would work all day for one producer, and then the guy across the hall made some of my favorite records of all time. And I went to him and was like, I will do anything you want on these records. I'll do kick drum replacement. I'll do the grunt work. I don't care. And so I would finish my day job working for one producer and start at 7 p.m. and go till 2 a.m, like working for the next one. And so like I did my kind of frenetic, like work all the time, say yes to everything, figure it out stuff in music. And I've never really been able to do that in film because I have a family, and especially as my family's gotten older, my kids have gotten bigger, it's some of the kind of grunt work of parenting is lower, but they have like their own lives that I disrupt massively with my work and with travel and all of that stuff. So I feel like it's slowed my progression some, that I've chosen to let it kind of, I could have like put my shoulder into getting into film and TV come hell or high water, right? But I didn't. I felt like I've had to be a bit more methodical and a bit slower in my development into that, so that I'm going to kind of hit it into film and TV as they're leaving my kind of house, and I'm able to kind of go as much as I need to go again. And so I think I've had to be a bit strategic in that way, but I think it's it's been incredibly beneficial as well. And it's something that's like really informed kind of my intention and why I'm doing what I do. I say a lot too, like having kids has been an amazing bullshit filter, because it costs me something to do everything. And that's true whether you have kids or not. Like every decision costs you time, energy, attention, relationship, whatever it may be. And so I think that like it's been helpful just because it keeps it top of mind of like, is this something I want to spend my time on? You know?
But it's interesting that you're thinking, you're playing the long game. That's
I mean, that's one of the things that's really exciting about film is that like it requires decades of work to acquire the skills to be able to kind of like make those really lasting pieces of work. Like I love the fact that like, directors really hit their prime in their 50s and 60s. That's kind of incredible. Like there's not a lot of profession, like, every athlete, I'd be retired I'd be retired a decade ago if I was a professional athlete, and so we've chosen a thing in which the thing that we love to do, you kind of peak into like, the prime of your career is like still a decade or more down the road for me, and I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, that's cool. I like hearing that, thinking in that sense, because it's so hard to get caught up in am I going to get left behind, or am I going to not be relevant? Am I going to not be doing this in 10 years?
For sure.
But having that long-term mindset of, I want to be doing this until I'm old, until, Scorsese is still making beautiful things at 80 something years old. And he's probably, I think I heard him say it's like that he still had a couple stories in him.
Of course. Yeah.
That's incredible. He's thinking like, I'm going to be probably thinking in a wheelchair still telling stories.
I mean, my grandfather was a trial attorney, and he literally worked until 6 months before he died.
Wow.
Just like loved what he did, and I feel like that was always the model for me, is like find something that you can, like he was just like, why would I retire? It's my favorite thing to do, So
I tell my wife that I've always, we've always talked about that idea of not having the traditional typical job lifestyle. And I'm like, I don't want to retire. Like I'm not working towards a retirement date. Like I don't, there's no expiration date on what I'm doing.
For sure.
Or there's no like, I can't wait till I'm this age to be done. So it's one of the beautiful things about doing this.
For sure.
Well, let's kind of start winding it down. I wanted to ask a couple kind of practical questions, I guess. What is the one thing that artists wanting to grow should do better?
Do better. I think a lot of times artists, I think a lot of growth comes from your peer group. And I think a lot of times we focus on I want to be connected to the people that are further along the path than you, when the reality is the people that you're kind of coming up with will be the source of a lot of your forward progress. And I think that people don't spend enough time developing relationships laterally, I think that's an incredibly important use of time, is to kind of find the people that you resonate with that are in your kind of immediate circle. And you kind of spend time and attention on those people, I think is very, very important. And then the other is I think regardless of whether you're getting paid to do the things you want to be doing or not, saying yes or developing things that don't make sense on paper, saying yes to things that don't make sense on paper, whether that be a job that doesn't pay that well but is kind of interesting or lets you try the thing. The easy answer is personal work. A lot of people will say that kind of, oh, you got to be working on personal projects. Yeah. I would broaden it to I think you need to be planting and harvesting. You can't, say yes to some stuff where you're I don't know where that's going to go. But 2 years from now, you'll realize oh my God, that one little thing turned into a relationship that became fruitful years later, for sure. So I feel developing lateral relationships with your peers, real relationships with your peers, and planning shit is important.
That's the video you put out. If I was what would you do? You'd be here's the link
right here.
Click the link below or follow.
But I think the reason why I made that video is, I think for me is that's been one of the most exciting things over the last year. One of the biggest changes is that I feel I was able to be reminded of how important it is to just say yes to some things, which I was told by an early kind of mentor, everything happens in kind of 5-year cycles. And for the first 2 years of the cycle, you just say yes to everything because you don't know what's going to happen. Then at the midpoint, you basically still say yes, but you only show things that are exactly what you want to be working on. And for the next 2 years, you only say yes to the things that are in line with what you want. And then that will kind of, you'll have now a body of work that's pretty specific of what you want to be doing. And then that cycle starts over again. You start over. And you just start going hey, I want to be in this world. And then you just start saying yes to everything because you don't know how it's going to happen. And then you just get more specific and say no. And then just start again, say yes. Yeah. But it's easy to get to the point where you're just saying no, or the things that are coming in are exactly the things you've already done. And so not getting stuck in that place only happens by saying yes to stuff that's not what you would normally be doing.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a great way to end it. Yeah. I like that takeaway of the 5-year cycle. That's really good.
For sure.
Well, thanks, dude.
Yeah, man.
I appreciate you for doing this, and let's do it again.
Sounds good.
Hey, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoy this conversation, please give us a follow, subscribe, and check out larkhaus.com to find out more about the different initiatives that we are developing to build community and to help artists like you realize their full potential. See you soon.